Back on the Newsfeed PM. Now, thousands of Western Cape residents have been displaced as heavy rains continue to flood low-lying areas across the province. Disaster officials report widespread damage with many homes submerged underwater. The South African Weather Service says temperatures are expected to peak from Monday afternoon. But for now, authorities are urging South Africans to stay warm and remain cautious. Joining me now is Dr. Elias Sithole, head of the National Disaster Management Sector. Dr. Sithole, good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. We heard that some communities, indeed, where thousands and thousands of homes could be underwater at this particular point. Is the situation getting better?
Good afternoon, Tawa. Good afternoon to the viewers. I would say that it's unfortunate that these kind of floods, they happen during a time in the country where we're experiencing very cold weather. So, but I can assure you that our disaster teams, we have actually put them on standby when this winter season started. Then we are actually putting the boots on the ground, making sure that all the affected communities are being assisted.
One of the challenges is that some of these areas have been problematic for a while now, and therefore it's generally not advisable that those communities rebuild there, because these areas have been a threat of disaster of this nature for a long time now. What is the plan of relocation?
Yes, yeah, definitely you are correct. The majority of these affected communities across the country, you tend to find that these are the people who reside in places which they shouldn't be residing. So after Eastern Cape floods, we've been now engaging the Department of Human Settlement and other departments so that we can come up with a strategy, how best we can relocate these communities. But also the other problem which we end up facing is that you will then relocate those communities next to the riverbanks or in areas which they don't need to reside. But a week or after a week, then we have got new people coming in and residing to those areas. So what we want to do, once we relocate those people, and we have to make sure that those areas which we have identified as hotspots, then we barricade them, we'll make sure that no one resides to those areas. So that is the strategy now, which we want to implement moving forward with other departments.
The question of poor drainage, either because it's low-lying areas, either because the infrastructure has collapsed or the infrastructure has not been maintained. Of course, this is a time in which this needs to be addressed. What plan is being put in place to address that?
Yes, there are plans which we are working with the municipality to action those plans. And then we brought in the SANDF on board as well. We want to come up with the plans where we clean those drainage systems, because we did pick up that if a particular area is experiencing the heavy rainfall and those drainage systems, they tend to be flooded easily, and then they end up flooding either the town or the mall or the roads. But also, let me indicate this, that the country has been developing since after 1994, which is a good thing. That we are living in a developing country. But unfortunately, because those infrastructure where we're doing development are old, and they can't actually take the volume of either the sewer or the water or the challenges come with development, then you find ourselves in the space where we have to deal with infrastructure which is collapsing. But also, there's an element where we need to constantly maintain those infrastructure, specifically at the municipality space. So it's about working with the municipalities, but there is a process which we thought we could actually start and taking those small baby steps, making sure that we start with the process of the cleaning of the drainage system.
Yeah. From a disaster management point of view, right, we had the leader of the economic freedom fighters in the Eastern Cape telling the people that the South African National Defence Force should have been brought in earlier, saying the responsiveness of disaster management there was a letdown, because he believes there could have been more people that could have been saved. For example, children who were hanging on trees, that were hanging for dear life. The fact that the South African National Defence Force came after the fact is something that needs to be relooked. In terms of your strategies, how do you deploy, and at what point does the South African National Defence Force kick in?
Yeah, we use the three-prong approach when we are dealing with disasters. Is the immediate humanitarian relief, which we are using. Then the second one is the stability and recovery. And the third one is the reconstruction and rehabilitation. Now, sometimes there is a limitation in terms of the SANDF, meaning if we have to bring in the aerial support, like your helicopters, if the weather condition is not good, then they can't fly. Now, in terms of bringing the SANDF on board as early as we can, we work in terms of the resource. If we have got enough resource on the ground, we don't want to cloud an environment with deploying too much resource because, for example, when we're experiencing floods, we need people to be rescued. If we've got enough rescue teams, which actually could assist and rescue the communities, we'll then put the SANDF on standby to say if we need air support, then they will come on board. If we need more manpower, then they will come on board. But also, we've signed the MOU, specifically in the Eastern Cape, with the surrounding provinces like for Eastern Cape and KZN, meaning that highly specialized teams from Eastern Cape and KZN, we could easily bring them on board if there was a crisis in the Eastern Cape, then we can deploy and assist. So the SANDF, we work with them. We've signed the MOU with the SANDF. There is really a very close collaboration, but we work in terms of the resource allocation as and when the need arises.
As far as the Western Cape is concerned now, what are the expectations, I suppose, over the next week?
Yeah, we have been receiving updates from South African Weather Services in terms of the situation on the ground, but also we're working very close with the teams from Western Cape in terms of dealing with the situation on the ground. Of course, as you have indicated in your introduction remarks, you will have those areas which are really in the vulnerable areas, low-lying areas, in the floodplains, which these areas we have to come up with a permanent solution because we can't constantly, year in, year out, we're dealing with the same problem in the same area. So we are working very close with the Western Cape, but we have a very strong teams in the Western Cape, and then anything which extraordinary comes out, we're able to bring other resources and assist them.
Dr. Elias, we thank you for your time. Dr. Elias Sithole, the head of the disaster management on the emergency teams being deployed across the country, especially in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, where they've experienced some extreme weather conditions.